Hi folks, and welcome back to the channel. Today is the turn of the V2s. I am comparing and contrasting the Seestern V2 and the Tactical Frog V2, both Doxa homages. But what are the improvements? What are the differences? And ultimately, which watch comes out on top? Well, without any further ado, let's get into the review. I have previously made a version 1 comparison review of both of these watches. I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below if you want to go ahead and check that out. And as always folks, if you could please take a second, hit that subscribe button, it would be much appreciated. So let's start off by covering the dimensions of both watches for you. I'll pop them up on the screen. Now as you can see, they're not terribly different between the two watches. The only ones to note of are the thicknesses and the weight. The thickness on the Tactical Frog is a little bit thinner, the Seestern being that little bit thicker, and the weight as well. There's only 10 grams on paper, but when on wrist it does make a slight difference. Now moving on to price. Again, very similarly priced watches. The Tactical Frog costing $169 US, equating to around £125, whereas the Seestern slightly more expensive, $179.90, equating to roughly £135. But again, same ballpark figure for both watches. The movements, again, identical movements used on both watches. The Seiko NH35 and timed over 24 hours, the Tactical Frog coming in at plus 4 seconds per day, while the Seestern still holding a pretty incredible plus 1 second a day gain. Both excellent results from the NH35. So let's go ahead and have a look at the differences and the improvements for both of these V2s and how they compare. So both watches retain the same dial designs from their respective V1s. The Tactical Frog has that Tactical Frog line of text removed from the dial. That is the only difference to the dial on the V2 Tactical Frog, whereas Seestern it still retains the same dial layout. However, they have introduced those 3 new colour options. Now, I think the new colour options for version 2 of the Seestern are a big bonus, and they are certainly enticing for some buyers to go ahead and purchase the new colour options. It should be mentioned that both watches do retain the exact same markers, logos and handsets from their respective version 1s. So moving on to the bezels. Now the bezels on both of these watches are inherently different. They are different in appearance and they are different in operation. Now both of these bezels received lumed pips at the 12 there to make operation in the dark possible. As you can see straight off the bat, the Seesterns is lined up perfectly, the Tactical Frogs not so much. Now operationally these bezels are different as well. Now the Seestern bezel, I'll show you a little video there. You can see me turning it. It's one complete bezel. Obviously the scales turning together there as they should. But when compared to the Tactical Frog's bezel, you can see when rotating only the outer section of the bezel rotates. Now this wasn't a particularly big deal to me, it didn't really mean much to me, but it was pointed out in the comments of my review of the Tactical Frog version 2 that this is actually quite dangerous. And it was something that I had never thought about. On the scale of these bezels is a no deco scale, a no decompression scale for diving. And what that means is you have to correspond how deep you are with how long you have without the need for decompression. And of course, both turning together on the Seestern means that this scale is still accurate. But when you take the Tactical Frogs turning out of sync with that black scale there, it means that it is potentially pretty dangerous. You could have the blue markers there lining up to the incorrect black markers, giving you a potentially dangerously incorrect reading, something I hadn't considered, and actually something that is potentially pretty dangerous. So let's move on to the cases then. So as discussed earlier, both of these cases are actually pretty different. You can see on the left there, the Tactical Frog case is much thinner than the Seestern's, and it is also curved, whereas the Seestern's case is much thicker towards that midpoint, and it is completely flat on the underside. Now, worth noting as well while we're here that the Tactical Frog has no lug holes drilled for fast strap changes, whereas the Seestern has those drilled lugs. Now, what those differences in cases actually equate to is quite a different experience when on the wrist. Now, I'll show you a wrist shot of the Tactical Frog there. You can see it does hug the wrist thanks to that lovely curved case and the slightly slimmer profile. It wears very, very well and very nicely, nice and comfortable there, whereas the Seestern does sit a little bit higher thanks to that flat case design, and it is just a different wear experience. Worth noting a difference of these two models. So if we have a quick look at the crystals now, the Seestern undergone a difference in crystal for this new version 2. They added 5 layers of AR coating to the underside, whereas the Tactical Frog's crystal is unchanged. Again, both inherently different crystals. You can see the Tactical Frog on the left there, highly domed crystal with that blue AR coating, causing quite a bit of distortion when angled away from being flat, whereas the Seestern's flat sapphire with that AR coating offering virtually zero distortion. Two very different looks and very different experiences when looking at them in everyday situations. So let's go on to the bracelets then. So the Tactical Frog underwent some bracelet changes for this version 2 Tactical Frog. We have the switch to the female end links there, and we also have the inclusion of screws instead of split pins. But worth noting, the mid links are still fused, so not a true beads of rice, whereas the Seestern's bracelet, believe it or not, remains completely unchanged, still has that beautiful true beads of rice bracelet and retaining its split pin design. And I think it is worth noting that the true beads of rice does feel that little bit better when worn on the wrist. So let's move on to Lume then. Now if I show you the Lume, you can see right from the get-go both watches fully charged, glowing nice and strongly there. But bit of a shocker on the Lume, I have to say. In the review for the version 1 Seestern, when I did the V2 Seestern review, compared to the version 1, the Lume was a little bit weaker, I felt. So I did think before I made the Lume video that the Tactical Frog would be the stronger in the Lume front. However, if we have a look at this footage and we speed it up a little bit to get things going, after a few minutes you can actually see the Seestern start to pull away. Now both of these watches have the same rough dial designs with larger markers at 12, 6 and 9 and the smaller markers in between. Now you can see as we speed things up, the Seestern's markers in between holding on that little bit better than the Tactical Frog, and overall after a few minutes the Seestern has the better Lume. So what is the verdict then, Chris? Well, as we have covered in the video so far, both of these watches are pretty different. Now, as with anything involving aesthetics and how things feel, many of these observations are purely subjective on my part. The Tactical Frog has that excellent case, lovely size, lovely shape. It feels very nice on the wrist. The Seestern, on the other hand, has that superb bracelet. It has a very nice bezel, nice crystal, and in my opinion, a very nice, attractive dial layout. Now, I think the addition of those 3 extra dial colours for version 2 on the Seestern is a massive plus. It makes people purchase and or even upgrade on that basis alone. The Tactical Frog changes were a little bit more subtle, replacing that tachymeter scale and the upgrade to those female end links, a little bit more subtle, but nevertheless were definitely worthwhile. Now for me, given that these watches are pretty different and to be fair, they are pretty similar in their basic specs. That rendering of the tactical frog's no deco scale on the bezel as useless and even potentially dangerous is a pretty big concern. Now, although I would point out it is pretty unlikely that a professional diver will solely rely on something like this from a watch like this, it is still a potential safety concern. And that is too big an issue, I think, to overlook. So I suppose in conclusion, I would have to say that both of these watches are not perfect. Both are aesthetically very different, both in appearance and how they feel when worn on the wrist. But given that they're both Doxa Homage watches, my personal preference would be this Seestern version 2. For me, the Seestern version 2 is, in my opinion, the better overall Doxa Homage. But by all means folks, this is subjective. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Do you have both? What's your preference? Have you tried both? Would you like to get one or the other? Let me know down below what your thoughts are. So as always folks, thank you so much for making it to the end of another video. If you did like it, hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That would be much appreciated. And I will see you in the next review.